Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Footy with Fletch podcast. Today's guest on my podcast is Nigel Carmody. Nigel played 160 VFL games with the KC Scorpions, now known as the KC Demons, and the Collingwood VFL teams. He is now a play-by-play commentator and host with Channel 7 covering their AFL, AFLW and VFL football. Thank you for joining me today, Nigel. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Fletch. Pleasure to be here. And episode 23 is perhaps a little bit of an honour, given the passing of the great Shane Keith Warner, who, of course, wore 23 with such swagger back in his day.
Yeah, it was shocking news that we had over the weekend. I guess that a lot of people knew Shane. And what was your reaction to the news when you first heard it?
Oh, complete shock, obviously. And given the news the day before with Rod Marsh's passing and hop that on top of obviously other events going on in our country with floods and then a war overseas as well. It's been a pretty full-on time for everyone coming out of COVID. But yeah, just complete shock and a lot of sadness too. He was an incredible Australian, an incredible Victorian. His cricket feats, which I grew up and he was almost the cricketing bridge between my teens and my adulthood. I got some fond memories of, I think particularly the 1999 World Cup semi-final for me stands out with what he did to bring us back from the brink to tie that game with South Africa. So many people talk about the run out at the end of the match, but I think without his 4 for 23, we wouldn't have played in that final, let alone won the tournament. And yeah, he was he mixed in some circles of obviously people I'm close with, and Campbell Brown in particular, who I've obviously know very well and I'm close to. It's hit him and some other people pretty hard because he was such a big presence in their lives.
Yeah, definitely is some really sad news that we received over the weekend. Can you tell me a little bit about what your childhood was like and what sports you were interested in?
It was great, and I was into pretty much everything. So I grew up in North Dandenong, so we lived about 10 minutes probably from the old Waverley Park. So it was pretty luxurious as a kid growing up in the suburbs that you had an AFL ground that effectively had footy on at least once every weekend. So mum and dad were pretty good taking me up there with a footy. And then once we were old enough, it was easy enough to slip up there with mates and watch plenty of footy. And yeah, growing up just was surrounded by sport, I suppose. Dad had played a bit of local footy with Oakley Districts in the old Federal and Southeast Suburban League. And he had, I think, 4 or 5 brothers who all played at Clayton in that competition as well. I had a grandfather who played for Collingwood and Hawthorn sort of just prior to World War II. So we had a great connection to the game, and I was surrounded by that. But sport in general, no different to most Aussie kids, I suppose. It was footy in winter, cricket in summer, and you thought you were going to play 300 AFL games and probably play 100 tests for Australia as well. So I was lucky and got to dabble in a lot of stuff as a kid too. The school I went to, Lindale Secondary College, they had a fantastic sporting program for a government high school, and they had pretty rich history, particularly in athletics. So got to do that as well. And yeah, just a childhood that's got a lot of fond memories and a lot of mates who are pretty like-minded in just having a love of sport.
It sounds like your family has a great history within sport. Was there a particular team that you grew up supporting or following?
Yeah, I was a North supporter growing up, which mum was never sure how it came about. She sort of thought it might have been linked to the kangaroo at the 1982 Brisbane Commonwealth Games. But for whatever reason, I ended up as a North supporter. And it was a pretty heady time to be a Kangaroos supporter, not so much in primary school, but certainly in my high school years where North were effectively on Friday night footy 7 or 8 times a year. And we had the great Wayne Carey and co taking us at least to a preliminary final each year. It was fantastic. 1996 grand final was a great day. My best mate, Cam Scott, who grew up 5 houses from me, is a Swan supporter. So we went to the footy together that day, and thankfully I was on the right side of the coin there. But it's been funny. My football allegiances effectively got turned off when I started playing in the VFL, and can distinctly remember playing against the Murray Kangaroos when the VFL and the AFL reserves merged in 2000. And quite quickly I figured out I can't barrack for anyone anymore because I'm too invested in my own footy. And then obviously through both being a player agent and working in the media as well, your allegiances totally disappear, I think, because you're just looking at the game through a different prism. But it's been good the last couple of years. I've actually had the opportunity to do a little bit of work with North and host the Sid Barker Medal and some other events and reconnect in some respects. And it's really good to see the trajectory that the footy club's on at the moment, on and off the field, and hopefully moving towards another period of success.
It will be great to see how North go this year in the AFL. Who were some of the footballers that you idolised as a child?
It was pretty broad, but yeah, Wayne Carey was a clear standout, just given both his impact on North Melbourne, but I think the game more broadly. And he was a match winner at a time where there was, I think, a handful of match winners in the AFL. You could probably go Lockett, Ablett, perhaps in a similar vein, and perhaps even Jason Dunstall. But he was just an incredible player, and the fact that North Melbourne and Dennis Pagan's game plan was geared around him almost wholly and solely just showed the impact of the man. And yeah, he was probably the standout hero. But I love the game, as I said. You'd be happy to watch whoever, whenever, wherever. So again, we're in a time where we didn't have Fox Footy and saturation coverage through the internet and all those sorts of things. So anytime there was footy on, you sort of had to grab it with both hands. So if it was, the Swans and the Brisbane Bears on a Sunday afternoon, if you weren't playing footy yourself, you were probably sitting in front of the TV watching it and, enjoying watching either a young Nathan Buckley or a player like that.
Yeah, you were lucky to grow up in a time where there was some absolute superstars of the game. You played with the KC Scorpions and now the KC Demons and Collingwood between 2000 and 2008. What was it like to play 160 games in the VFL?
Incredible, and something I'm really proud of and lucky to have done as well. And it was a great time to, I guess, almost see two eras of the competition. So I went to Springvale in 1998. The club had come off a really good period of success, winning a couple of premierships in the mid-90s, and then went through a little bit of change. A new coach by the name of Peter Nicholson came in at the start of 1998, and I went down with about 7 or 8 guys I'd played in an under-18s premiership with at Springvale Districts in the Southern League. None of us had really played in the TAC Cup or anything, but we were playing at Newcomen Road, which was Springvale's home ground as well. So we got invited to pre-season, tried our luck. I was lucky enough to make the list. I played reserves in my first 2 years in a team that we made a preliminary final and then a grand final the following year. The club's senior team in 98 and 99 won back-to-back premierships, and to see that and be around some legends of VFA/VFL football like Dennis Knight, Damien Carroll, Simon Clark, Kane Taylor, just to name a few, was incredible for my learnings as a footballer and a person. And then in 2000, when the VFL and the AFL reserves merged, that was obviously a changing of the guard, but it also opened up an opportunity for me to play some senior footy with a lot of those legends moving on. So I got to play my first game in a draw, actually, against Werribee out at the old Chirnside Park in Melbourne's West in early 2000. One of my best mates and the guy who played in 1-5 best and fairest at Casey, Steve Harrison, was actually laid out that game. So that's how I got to make my debut. And that 2000 season, I've got some really fond memories of. We were a standalone club in an 18-team competition, and we were a draw. That draw against Werribee was our only points in the first 5 rounds of the season. And then we sort of had this mix of old and young that came together, and we went on a tear in the second half of the season. We beat a lot of the AFL reserves teams like St Kilda and Geelong, and famously beat Sandringham, who were the eventual premiers, in a game at VFL Park. Was our home ground that season. That was the year between VFL Park being an AFL venue and obviously being turned over into Hawthorn's hands. And we turned that into a bit of a fortress for a bit. There was the old Monday night footy that was on Optus Vision. And yeah, we had an amazing season where we ended up making the finals and sort of launched from there. So yeah, I'm very proud, Fletch. Like, as I said, I wasn't lucky enough or deemed good enough to play at the highest level, but absolutely playing 150 plus VFL games is the next best thing.
You mentioned that you played in a draw for your first match. What was that like? It must have been a strange feeling post-match.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And more so that the old days of, well, probably before players rotating and being on quite clear managed minutes. I sat on the bench till about halfway through the third quarter, and I think my first interaction in the game was to run on, lay a tackle, which thankfully helped set up a goal. So yeah, different feeling and a different introduction. But yeah, as I said, my memories of 2000 and 2001, when we had our first year aligned with St Kilda and made it all the way through to a prelim. And the only two teams we lost to in the finals were Box Hill, the eventual premiers, the team that Sam Mitchell got drafted out of, and Werribee, who had a team that included some young Bulldogs at that stage like Bob Murphy and Daniel G and Syracuse, who went on to obviously bigger and better things. Yeah, those first 2 years of my senior career at Springvale are really fond.
What do you think are some of your favourite things about commentating the VFL nowadays, given that you were a part of it during your playing career?
I feel like I've got a really good understanding of the legacy that we have as broadcasters, but also the importance of threading together the history of this league that goes back until the 1870s in a similar way, shape or form. It's obviously had a lot of changes over time, and the current structure that sort of bridges together the local standalone clubs and the AFL aligned team. So I think having a really clear understanding of that's important, but then also, I suppose, understanding the legacy from a media point of view as well. And Seven have had the rights to the VFL since 2015, and myself, Jason Campbell-Brown, have been lucky enough to do it through that stretch of time, barring for the speed hump of COVID. But that's been a real honour and a privilege. The ABC did a tremendous job for some, 25, nearly 30 years. And prior to that, Channel 10 had the rights in the early 1980s. And you look back on the commentary teams they had then of Rex Hunt, Bruce McAvaney and Eddie Maguire. Like it's a quite a big distinction to be able to commentate on the VFL. So we hold that in really high regard. And I think we've tried to celebrate that as much as possible over the last few years and bridge, past, current and future. And I think the other great thing about the league at the moment, which has been helped by some of the AFL rule changes, is it is an incredible pipeline for AFL talent at the moment. And we're the first people who get to start to tell some of those players' stories before they're seen on the big stage.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the great things about the VFL competition, seeing those players develop from the VFL and then eventually go on to play in the AFL. It's great to see. Now, you started your media journey volunteering at Casey Radio. What was this experience like for you?
Yeah, again, fantastic. And I think if you plot most people's course to commentating AFL or being on television and radio in the mainstream media at, I guess, what you'd consider to be the highest level achievable, a lot of those journeys start from pretty humble beginnings, and community radio is often the starting point for that as well. And that was the case for me. So out of high school, I went to Deakin University. I was doing a commerce sports management degree and an arts degree in journalism. And through the connection with Free SER, as it was at the time, it's now Casey Radio, 97.7, as it still is on the FM band, based out there near Casey Fields. They called Springvale games and VFL games as well. So there was a little bit of a link there and some crossover, and then sort of evolved to jumping in on a Sunday if we played on a Saturday and maybe doing, I guess, a clandestine version of special comments and trying to add something to the coverage and learn. And then a gentleman by the name of David Lenton, who was the general manager of the station at that time, and he'd come from a background in radio in the sort of 70s and 80s, where I think he was on some quite high-profile AM stations. He sort of tapped myself and my best mate Cam, the Swan supporter, on the shoulder and said, "Oh, would you be interested in doing a show?" So we actually did 2 days of breakfast radio together through 2000, 2001 and early 2002 as well. And that in itself, you are the producer, you are the director, you're doing everything, you're picking the songs. So that experience was awesome. We had to go and find our own guests. And having been thrown in the deep end with something like that was a really good experience early on, even to the point where I still remember we were on radio the morning after September 11 happened in New York. So we were watching a fuzzy TV screen in the corner of our studio, sort of explaining to people what had gone on. And to be involved in moments like that was pretty incredible, even only on a small scale. But yeah, from there it evolved to obviously commentating some footy with 3SER and juggling that with my own playing. And even 2007, Casey, as we were at the time, we made the finals, we got knocked out, and 3 weeks later I was sitting in the commentary box calling Geelong beating Coburg in the VFL grand final that year, and Tom Lonergan kicking 6 goals and winning the Norm Goss when he's come back from a almost life-threatening injury in the AFL 12 months prior. So yeah, he was able to sort of juggle the two for a while and then obviously make a transition once playing had stopped for me to focusing on it more wholly and solely.
Yeah, community radio is a great place to start out, like you mentioned. You commentated with Channel 7 and you're still commentating with them from 2015 to the current time. What do you remember from your first match with Channel 7?
A lot to learn. So that was Footscray playing Box Hill. So it was, the first game where 7 was covering the VFL and Maguire Media Jam TV with a production company as well. So everyone was coming into it a little bit green, and it was the first time myself, Jason Bennett and Campbell had sort of worked together. But a few nerves and obviously a sense of anticipation to kick it off, and transferring the skills of calling on radio to television is very different. You need to sort of pare back and adjust your style, given the audience has already got the best part of 80 to 90% of what they need already on the screen in the form of the pictures. So, we got the first one out of the way, and there was probably a few kinks to iron out, but pretty quickly we were able to hit stride. And 2015, we had some incredible games to call that season as well. And that first final series at Port Melbourne, where Essendon made a little bit of a run, and it was players like Anthony McDonald tipping Woody before he was an AFL listed player, and Aaron Francis and other players like that were sort of making a name for themselves. That was such a incredible time to be swept up in. And also, I think we were able to bring, and I think we have been able over the last few years to bring VFL to a broader audience. And it's always great to see that transfer, particularly come the final series, where you see people turn up to, whether it's Port or Punt Road for a final, and they walk in with their dog. They can stand wherever they want. They can have a full strength beer and something to eat, and probably get change out of $20, and they just sort of sit around and go, "Oh, how good's this?" So, it's been a phenomenal journey to help amplify the competition and just show how good it is.
Your coverage on Channel 7 has been fantastic, and it's been great to watch. Now, is it strange to think about the fact that 2019 was the last time that we had a VFL Premier? Richmond won the premiership in 2019 in the VFL and the AFL. Marlon Pickett was fantastic in that match as well. What do you remember from that day?
Oh, it was one of the most incredible games of footy I've ever seen. And we've been blessed over the time we've been calling the competition, that the grand final, which is clearly the most watched game of footy for the season, they have lived up to the bill every single year. Williamstown Box Hill the first season ended up being a big margin in the end, I think close to 10 goals, but that was a close game until pretty much 3/4 time. But that Richmond Williamstown game, where again you had all the beauty of the VFL, effectively it's the FA Cup every single week, that you've got Richmond, a professional outfit, the best team in the AFL, and you mentioned Marlon Pickett, but a bunch of other guys who either went and played in the 2020 premiership or have been around the mark through their incredible history, playing against a team of, a handful of guys who've had some AFL experience, but for the most part, players who have elected to go and play at the highest level at Williamstown, but Monday to Friday are holding down jobs or studying or doing something else. And Richmond dominated the first part of that game and led comfortably early in quite windy and tricky conditions. But Williamstown, to their credit, and it's the hallmark of them and I think some of these other standalone teams, they just chipped away and hung in there all day, to the point where in the final quarter they had all the momentum. They've got an incredible supporter base as well. So you had the Richmond Army on one side, the Williamstown supporters on the other, and it was a cauldron of noise. And that's probably one of the nice things of Icon Park as well. It doesn't need, I reckon, more than 10 or 15,000 to sound a lot louder, and the atmosphere late in the game, phenomenal. And then, of course, the closing stages, which, people can track down on YouTube, with Willie Wheeler's shots for goal, like just incredible drama. And Richmond got over the line. It was a deserved premiership for them because they'd been around the mark and they'd had the heartbreak against Port Melbourne a couple of years earlier. So, Fletch, to think that's the last grand final we've done, it sucks, to be honest. And we were lucky enough to get back and do a few games last year, which was really good. And I think it was important for the competition that it wasn't a 2-year wipeout, but can't wait for this season. It starts March 27, and to get to a final series and hopefully revert to type will be fantastic.
It will be a great season as well this year. Now, you were involved with the first AFLW match on Channel 7. It was Carlton and Collingwood at Icon Park. What was it like to call that game alongside Jason Bennett?
I'll take that memory to my grave, Fletch. It's a night, even we've only just passed the 5-year anniversary of it, and you get a bit emotional thinking about it, and not just the journey that the competition and the sport as a whole's had in that time, but 2 weeks prior to that game being moved, it was scheduled to be at Olympic Park Oval, and I remember going to watch Carlton and Melbourne playing a practice match that basically wasn't advertised, and about 2,000 people turned up, and I think the AFL sort of twigged and went, oh, this might be a bit bigger than we're anticipating here. We can't have this at the Holden Centre. And it was similar. Jason, myself, Daisy Pearce and Lauren Arnell we just went and did a practice call that didn't go to air of Collingwood and the Bulldogs on Australia Day night at Olympic Park. And same thing, there was probably 1,500 people there, and the Australian Open was going along the road. So we had a sense that it was going to be a big night. And then, I'll never forget, I got there about 3 hours before the game. The weather was perfect, everything you could hope for that time of year. And the crowd was slowly starting to stream in, even a couple of hours before the game. And you thought, okay, maybe this is 15 tonight, and that would be a phenomenal effort. And then I'll never forget, we did our pre-match on the ground, made my way up the stairs to the commentary box at Icon, and I'll never forget lifting my binoculars for the first time to my eyes and looking at the back of the Legend stand, which is traditionally the last part of Icon Park that would get filled for any game in its history. And it was full right to the back. And that sent shivers down my spine. And then, what unfolded in the next couple of hours with Darcy Vessio's incredible game and all the action and players becoming household names effectively over the next 2 hours. And we're off and running from there. So, once that night finished, I think myself, Jace, and it was Daisy Pearce and Patrick Dangerfield that night doing special comments. We just looked at each other and thought we've been part of something pretty special tonight, and the journey's only continued since. And it is a absolute privilege to be part of commentating AFLW, and as I said, having seen and hopefully helped in some way, shape or form grow the competition. And as a dad of 2 young girls who've been born in the time of the league, I've got a better sense than I did 5 years ago of how important this league is for providing opportunities.
It is a great competition, and I can't wait to see it develop in the next couple of years. Of course, the expansion of the competition to 18 teams will occur later this year. That must be a great feeling as well, to be able to be a part of that later this year when the 2022-2023 comp starts.
Yeah, I think the more opportunities being created is fantastic. And the AFL, again, have had a very aggressive expansion strategy to go from 8 teams to 18 in the space of 7 seasons. Again, throwing COVID into the middle of it as well is really aggressive, but that's being done, I suppose, with future growth in mind. So it's exciting that those 4 clubs can come in. And again, I think the rivalries that are created out of that, the fact that we'll have a showdown, a battle of the bridge, games like that in the AFLW like we do in the AFL is going to be super for the growth of the sport.
It would be great to see that season as well. Now, you work with Jason Bennett and Campbell Brown on Sevens VFL coverage, like you mentioned. What is it like to work with these 2 guys, given that they're so knowledgeable about football like yourself?
It's the best. We have so much fun. We've developed a great bond. I like to think sort of Jace is probably at one end of the spectrum, Brownie's at the other, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I'm sure they might argue that point, but we've had so much fun doing it. And again, I think apart from some exhilarating footy at times and like we said, seeing guys before their household names get their start and start to carve out a little bit of a legacy. VFL grounds, as you probably know, Fletch, are not often purpose-built in terms of media facilities, and we've had some pretty fun times over the years, particularly as a result of weather. We had a game at Box Hill a few years ago where they actually put us in scaffolding on the Middleborough Road side of the ground. So you see the weather coming across Melbourne across the course of the day. This was a match played sort of in early August, and there was a wave after wave coming through the course of the day. And there's great footage of myself, Jace Campbell, but also Peter Bentz, who's a very well-known floor manager and worked in television for about 40 years. Bentzy's I think he's in his 70s, and he's pretty fit. He's a good runner in his day, and there's not much of him. And poor Bentsy was trying to hold down the poles of this marquee that was ready to fly out into the eastern suburbs. And I'll never forget, finished that game, and we're all sort of wet and soaked through. Thankfully, none of our equipment had blown up during the course of the match as well. And I had to go and call a St Kilda Hawthorn St Kilda Hawthorn AFL game that night on radio. So actually, I slipped through the offices of TLA where I used to work in Hawthorn. I had a shower, I got something to eat, and just dusted myself after a long day. But it was nice to spend that night calling in a roofed stadium in a very comfortable commentary box rather than freezing, getting wet and cold on a scaffold. But yeah, too many stories to go through. I could talk for hours about the fun we've had over the years, and even think back to the early days of Brownie going and joining the Essendon Jamie Army at a Port Melbourne final and putting on the Bombers pajamas, like things like that. It's just been incredible fun, and it's a privilege to be involved.
It has been great to watch the 7 VFL coverage. Now, you mentioned that you were a player manager with TLA Worldwide from 2004 to 2021. What was this role like for you, and what did you get out of it?
Yeah, I've been so lucky to have a journey through football that I probably couldn't have even imagined as a kid. So as a player agent, clearly your role is to go and look after your players in multiple ways, managing or looking after their contract negotiations is sort of the principal function. But then there's a support mechanism there across marketing and welfare and helping them develop their career off the field that's really important. I think they were things that were close to my heart because I like helping people generally. So to be able to do that for a living was something I've enjoyed, and I got as much buzz out of not only seeing guys win premierships and achieve individual accolades as I did seeing them either develop a career path that they go into outside the sport or see them grow as people and, in a lot of cases become husbands and fathers as well, and just contributing to society. So it was a phenomenal journey, and TLA themselves have been incredible in helping shape not only me as a person and providing me with tremendous opportunities in the player agency space, but then also from a media point of view. And I'm pretty lucky that I can maintain those connections because I've flipped from being an employee to a client effectively. So had a great time there. It's an incredible business what Craig Kelly and some of the founding fathers of TLA have built and sustained over the last 25 years. It's had a very distinct impact on how sport in our country looks.
And just finally, in this interview, you are a fantastic commentator, but I think a lot of people want to know, what is a commentator's research style like before a match? It differs between commentators, but what's your research style like?
Probably depends a little bit on the broadcast, but for a typical game of footy, whether it's AFL, VFL or AFLW with 7, I've got a reasonably set process in terms of I'll put together effectively an Excel spreadsheet that has both the teams, the basic statistical data on, height, weight, games played, goals, all those sorts of things, and then a little bit on each player effectively in terms of performance and things that are perhaps relevant to that particular game. And if you stumble across an interesting stat or something that you think you might be able to use at the appropriate time in the game, then you have that handy. And then there's probably some supporting notes around broader things around game style of both the teams and trends to follow in the match that are going to help tell the story behind the numbers, which I think's really important sometimes. And I think that's been quite specific within AFLW as the competition has developed over the last few seasons, is to understand, okay, how's the game being played? Who are the important players and what statistics matter? So using that as a little bit of a background or a platform, I suppose, has been important. And it gives you an opportunity then to talk to both the audience, because you can't expect that your audience has been there for the entire game. Sometimes someone's come in from mowing the lawn or being at the beach and they don't know what's going on. So you've got to give them the update and also help contextualize things in terms of, well, one team's dominated this particular period of the game, so that's why they're currently leading the game you're just tuning into. But it also then gives you the right ammunition to send towards your special comments people and ask the right questions of them so they can give the insight, because it's our job to tell people what's happening, but it's the experts' job to tell people how and why things have happened, which, if you can have a distinction between the two and then bring them together, I think then everyone's performing their role. So, I've got a process that's probably been refined over time. particularly with AFL games, it's perhaps a little bit easier because there's more information out there. And with Seven, they've got people like Swamp and Josh Kay working in the background, providing a lot of great statistical stuff as well, and throwing up things. Even during the game, they can be in your ear saying, hey, this is such and such as, 50th goal, or he's done this or that. So that support's great. Whereas, obviously AFLW and VFL, we perhaps don't have those resources, but that's where you've just got to get to your research and pick up the phone and speak to coaches and other people you've got relationships with to make sure you've got the right information for your audience.
It is a great insight today. Thank you very much for joining me, Nigel. It's been great to talk to you. All the best for the upcoming AFL and VFL season, and all the best for the AFLW season as well. Thanks again.
My pleasure, Fletch. Great job with your podcast.
Thank you very much. There you have it, Nigel Carmody on the Footy with Fletch podcast.